Let's take a look at the orchard.
Yeah, I'm excited to look at this.
And so this area had 4 or 5 pretty massive trees. So there were 2 really big poplars. There was a really good sized red maple. There was and a couple gum trees. And so I dropped, I mean, they were great trees, and I loved, you know, looking out my back deck and seeing them, but I really wanted to have this as a productive, functioning system in another sense. And so dropped those, converted most of it into firewood, which we heat our home with firewood and a wood-burning stove. And then I built out 4 swales, just slightly off contour. And so the swales are 1% running downhill, more or less, bringing water from the hardscape of the driveway, bringing that water. It runs in between these 2 oaks, the white oak further away from us, red oak here. And it used to just cut through and really erode some of the ground and the pasture down there. Now that water is captured by these swales and it's moved out to this drier ridge over here. I mean, most of it is, you know, slowed and spread and sunk here in the swales, but on really big rain events, it moves it out to a really dry ridge. And I've seen a lot of this grass bounce back already because of that. And I just put these in this spring. So the little bit of rain that we've had has done a really good job of getting into, you know, putting it where I need it.
Right. And what is a swale, the basic description of a swale, just for those who have never heard of that concept before?
Yeah, sure. So a swale is really you're building a ditch, if you will, and you're moving that soil and that mass onto the downhill side of it. And so most of the time, a swale is on contour and it's trapping and capturing that water. And it's usually quite a bit bigger than this. So typically, the uphill side of it is a little bit deeper in cut, and the swale itself is oftentimes bigger because it's more for holding water. Here, it's more for moving water. But at that 1% slope, it's a very slow movement. And most everything, unless it's a really big rain event, gets sunk into the ground here and into the swale.
So when you say that 1% slope, that means that the swales, the trench essentially is slightly tilted downwards. Is that
correct? Yeah. So 1% is basically there's a fall. I believe the way it works, it's a fall of 1 inch over a 100-inch gap. I believe is what it is. And so that 1%, yeah, it just moves water very, very slowly. Yeah. And so I laid this out. I just watched a YouTube video and built an A-frame level with a plumb line and marked what 1% would be on either side, and just set it up.
Yep.
Put a stake, pivoted, put a stake, pivoted, put a stake, and yeah, that's how I marked out this entire pasture. And so there are about 70 fruit trees, or various trees actually, in here.
What's the species you're doing?
So there's a big mix. So trying to make it as much of a polyculture as possible. I've kind of run it as nitrogen fixing tree. In my case, it's all honey locusts, so thornless honey locusts. So nitrogen fixing tree, apple, pear, nitrogen fixing tree, apple, peach, and just kind of ran that pattern throughout these swales. And so a lot of apples, pears, peaches, plums, apricot, mulberries, and cherries. I think that's it. And now what I'm working towards is interplanting these trees. So the trees are anywhere between 10 and 12 feet spacings. Okay. And I'll interplant with some fruiting bushes. So I already have some mulberries in. I've got this fall, I've got a bunch more mulberries coming. I'm sorry, not mulberries, elderberries. Oh, cool. So I have a bunch of elderberries in right now. I've got a bunch more coming, red currant, black currant. So I'm looking forward to kind of filling those gaps now in between the trees. And then in the understory, doing a lot of things to just kind of keep this weed pressure out as best I can until these trees grow up to shade the area. And so some things that I'll be planting, rhubarb. Actually, that was something that I was really surprised at how many people at the market wanted rhubarb. Yeah. And no one had it.
Yeah. Dude, you grow Swiss chard?
Yes.
How many people asked you if it was rhubarb?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like, every market, so many people ask me that.
Especially the rainbow, yeah. And they're like, It's like, no. But so that kind of, listening to my market, and I said, okay, I'm going to plant rhubarb then. And what a great, there's a great perennial crop that you don't really need to do a lot with. And there's a built-in market here locally. Yep. So rhubarb, horseradish, sorrel, let's see, wild senna, Sicily, hyssop. So a lot of different, again, just trying to make this as a polyculture as much as I can, bringing in pollinators, some things that are productive and I can get a harvest from. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that fill out more and more.
Beautiful.
Some bee balm, some butterfly bushes, some mints.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of good stuff.
Yeah, a lot of work ahead of me this fall for planting, but luckily I have some friends that are some city folk that are really easy to convince, like, hey, come work on the farm, and they'll come and give me a day's worth of work if I feed them and give them a beer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sounds like fun.
I tell you, speaking of deer, that's been my biggest struggle here.
Oh, they're coming after the trees, huh?
This poor cherry, I mean, I can't even say all that's left. I mean, they've eaten it down several times, and this budded out just recently, so.
A little cage around it till it gets established?
Yeah.
Or?
So that's what I did. I found on Craigslist a guy who had an electric net. It wasn't one of the poultry nets, though. It was big gaps up top, smaller at the bottom, almost like what you would put around a market garden to keep deer and other animals out. And he was getting rid of it for cheap. And I see why now, like, because of the way it's built, it's such a pain to move, like to pick up and gather, and it's very different than the poultry net. But I set that up around the bottom 2 swales, and that helped a lot. I mean, the deer right now come from that lower pasture that we were in. They cross the creek, they come right up that hill. Okay. And so I was seeing that most of the pressure was the bottom 2 swales. So I fenced those out with the electric net.
And you had some benefit from that?
And had some benefit. But yeah, my longest swale is this third from the bottom here. And I mean, as you can see, most of the trees have hung on and done really well. Yep. But I guess because it's close to the woods, so close to cover, the deer have just decimated this poor cherry here. But in between these, right now I've tried to do some annuals. Like I did some watermelons. Oh, good. I planted out some onion, planted out some pumpkin, planted out various things to just try to utilize the space that I have right now. But there's a mulberry. Here's the nitrogen fixing honey locust.
Honey locust.
Yeah, thornless variety. And it's, again, it's this tale of dry weather, but things have held on really well. And if you got an aerial view of this, like with a drone or something, you can even see it from the deck. This ground here, you can tell it's just been really charged from what the swale has captured and sunk, because compared to the really dry grass up here, this flush is much greener. It's much more verdant, and this is the case in between all of these swales.
Interesting.
And towards the end where that water gets moved. So it's really beautiful to see that system in play.
Yeah, absolutely.